Story time about how my dad was on the news and now everybody knows my last name.
So a little background information. This all happened whenever I was in 6th grade. This all happened on a Tuesday night. So I had school the next day. Well, my dad had went to work earlier in the day. Well, around 10 o'clock at night, we hadn't heard from my dad all day, which was super weird for him because he was always home around 10 o'clock. And even if he wasn't, he still would have kept in contact with us and let us know where he was at. So at this point, my family and I were really scared, and we're thinking that something happened to him. I was calling and texting him, my mom was calling and texting him. My whole family was pretty much trying to get a hold of him. Like, we had called all the hospitals to see if he was there. We called police stations to see if he might have been in jail or if they had his last name in the system. So nobody had heard or seen from him. So we all went to sleep that night hoping that he would show up in the morning. So the next day after I got home from school, my mom came home from work and she had told me about this phone call that she got. Like for part 2. Part 2 of how my dad was on the news and now everybody knows my last name. So like I said, my mom had gotten home from work and she told me about this phone call that she got while she was at work. So apparently one of her coworkers called her and said, "Hey, I think I saw your husband on the news." So after that, she showed me the news article and I couldn't even believe what I was reading. So I guess my dad had been drinking and he went to an auto repair shop and stole a car because I guess the keys were left in the door of the car. And what makes this even worse, the car that he stole had 2 guns in the trunk. And they weren't 2 pistols, these were 2 big ass guns that were fucking loaded. Oh wait, I forgot something. So before this, he had been at the strip club and somehow he ended up in pink lingerie. Guys, I cannot make this shit up. So he was driving around and he decided to park right in the middle of an intersection and it was literally causing a whole fucking scene. There were people with their kids worried as hell. So after that, a few people called the cops, like for part 3. Part 2 about how my dad was on the news and now everybody knows my last name. So like I said, my dad parked in the middle of an intersection and people were calling the cops. So when the police arrived, my dad was half passed out in the car. This happened in like the middle of broad day, like there's traffic everywhere. So when they finally get up to the car, my dad is literally slumped in the driver's seat. There was a bottle of whiskey in the door and it was completely empty. When they went to arrest him, he started resisting. He was screaming a bunch of profanities at them and started kicking them, threatening them with guns, which made the situation worse because my dad had no clue that there were any guns in the back of the car. So that just made the police think that they were his. So they take my dad to jail and he has like 7 charges against him. But we were happy because we knew where he was. Well, the worst part is, so the next day when I went to school, people were coming up to me asking if that was my dad on the news. Some people were even making fun of me because of what he did. And that's really fucking embarrassing for a 12-year-old. But it's okay, Dad, I still love you. Extremely creepy story time on how my aunt passed away. So a little background information. About 5 years ago, my aunt had gotten pregnant. It was really weird because a few months before she got pregnant, the doctor told her that she would never be able to have kids. And her husband had been trying for years. Well, I think like 2 weeks after the baby was born, it had passed away. And I don't really know why. For some reason, my mom won't tell me. Which is weird, but anyways, after that, my aunt just felt like a lot of things weren't going the way that she wanted them to in her life. So she decided to get closer with God. Well, every Sunday night, we go to my grandparents' house for a family dinner. And while we were there, my aunt starts going on this whole rampage. She said that God's not giving her the answers that she needs, and I don't really know what she means by answers. So my grandparents kick her out because she's acting like a psycho. Well, the same night at 3 a.m. in the morning, we hear a knocking on the door. And lo and behold, it's my aunt. So my mom lets her in because she feels bad and feels like she's the only one that will actually listen to my aunt. So she makes everybody sit at the kitchen table. And she pulls out a Ouija board from her bag, like for part 2. Creepy story time about how my aunt passed away, part 2. So like I said, she makes us all sit down at the kitchen table and she pulls out a Ouija board. She was like, "I found out how I can get some answers. I just feel like I need you guys around me for positive energy." And my family is very, very religious. Like, we don't fuck with that shit. But because my mom felt bad for her, she let her use it in our house. But my mom didn't want my sisters and I around that, so she just sent us to bed. Well, the next morning, I wake up and I ask my mom what happened with the Ouija board situation. My mom just said that it was really scary because before she thought it was like a load of bullshit, and she said that her and my dad didn't touch the Ouija board because, like I said, they were very religious and did not mess with that stuff. But apparently, it said for her not to buy a house with the numbers 2815. Well, 2 years later, my aunt got remarried, and her husband ended up having 2 kids. So they bought a new house, and no, it didn't have the numbers on it. One of their kids accidentally shattered the glass door, so they went and got a new one, and it came with those exact numbers on it. 2 days later, the house burnt down and nobody survived. Story time about the toxic boy that I almost started dating. So a little background information. Him and I both met on a set of a movie that we were in. Well, a few days into filming, he asked me out. So of course I said yes. And it was literally the most amazing first date ever. So he asked for a second date and I said yes, of course.
And the second date was terrible. He literally just tried to get in my pants the whole time. So then he asked me for a third date. And for some reason I said yes, hoping that it was not anything like the second date. And he didn't show up. So I pretty much got stood up. And then he even blocked my number. So a few months go by and I end up moving in with my best friend, about an hour away from where I was living when I met him. Well, the one night she came home and told me that he had messaged her on Instagram, which I thought was funny as hell because my best friend did not swing that way. So she pretends to flirt with him and asks him to come over. So he drives an hour to our apartment, and when he walks in, he just sees me standing in the kitchen. He immediately walked out. Storytime about how I was groomed for almost 2 years and didn't even know it. So a little background information. When I was 15, my house burnt down, and I went into a little bit of a depression. So after losing everything, my 6 siblings and I had to move into a 3-bedroom place with my grandparents. And a month or so later, I was looking for friends. Someone to talk to or pretty much anything that would just make me feel better. Well, this guy messaged me, and he said, "You're pretty as shit." And I'm 15, so a bitch was excited. Well, 2 weeks later, I asked my mom if I could go over my friend Samantha's. And of course she said yes, because I had stayed with Samantha a lot during this time. Also because there was barely room for any of us in this 3-bedroom house. So a little background information on my parents. My mom had been a police officer for 12 years. Sadly, she had to retire because of a neck surgery. My ex-stepdad was and still is a police officer today. Anyway, so my mom asked for pictures whenever I went over Samantha's to make sure I was really there. Like for part 2. Storytime about how I was groomed for almost 2 years and didn't even know. So like I said, my mom used to ask for pictures to make sure that I was really at Samantha's house. Well, Samantha lived about 10 minutes away from the guy that I was talking to. Every time that I went to her house, I would leave at about 8 p.m. and go over to his house. And he was 26 years old. And obviously I knew my parents would freak the fuck out if they found out. And we had planned to keep this a secret until I turned 18. So that way my parents couldn't tell me that I wasn't allowed to be with him. So flash forward to about 3 days before I turned 18. My mom comes into my work. She walks up to me, shows me a picture of him, and says, "Who the hell is this?" So of course I say I have no idea who the hell she's talking about. She said okay and then left. Well, as soon as I got home, her and my dad were sitting in the living room, waiting for me to explain who that man was. So I told them everything. They decided not to take legal action, but my mom explained to me that I was so young and he took advantage of me and stuff like that, so I never saw him again. Storytime about why I beat up my best friend. So a little background information. Her and I had been best friends since we were in 7th grade. Her family was rich, mine was poor, and at first she was a really good friend. She was always there for me whenever I needed her, until our freshman year of high school, which is when her and I started hanging out with boys. Now, my mom was kind of strict. She wouldn't really let me hang out with boys, but her mom was more lenient about her hanging out with boys. Every weekend, she would throw a party at her house, and she would throw them in her attic because 1, it was huge, and 2, her parents didn't give a fuck what she did up there. Anyways, she would always offer to do my hair and makeup before the party started, which always made me really excited because I never really put any work into my physical appearance. Well, little did I know, the only reason why she would offer to do my hair and makeup at these parties was so that way she could make me look like shit in front of all the boys. So after that, I taught myself how to do my own makeup and do my own hair. Like part 2 about why I beat up my best friend. So like I said, I learned how to do my hair and makeup, and she went on vacation for like a month straight. Well, when she came home, she threw another party, and she was like, "Don't worry, after I'm done getting ready, I'll do your makeup and do your hair." And I was like, "No, it's fine, I got it." She literally looks at me and she goes, "Are you sure? You don't really know how to do that. Like, it'll probably look really bad." And I'm like, "Why the fuck would you say that?" She goes, "No, like, I don't mean it to be rude. It's just that, like, I want you to look good in front of the boys and stuff like that." Like, sis tried to talk me into getting a shower for a full, like, 20 minutes. So after that, the whole night, she's literally being a pick-me girl. She's making all these comments about me in front of the boys, and I just keep brushing them off until her next party. We got ready, and I put on these expensive shoes that I had just bought, and she goes, "Wow, you just, like, really like to copy my style, don't you?" So she starts making comments that whole night about how my family's poor and stuff like that, and she threw up all over my shoes. So I dumped the trash can that everybody had threw up in that night on her, punched her in the face, but like 2 months later, she came to my house and apologized. Crazy ass story time about how my best friend's parents walked in on me sleeping with my best friend's brothers. And yes, I said brothers. So my freshman year, I became best friends with this girl, and she had 2 older, hot-ass brothers. One was in college, and one was a senior. Well, it was Christmas break, and her older brother from college was home, and my parents let me go with them to Florida for Christmas break. They had a super nice beach house, and I was sharing a room with my best friend.
and the boys were sharing a room. And our room was connected because there was a bathroom in the middle. Well, my best friend got super sick the first 3 days of the trip, so she didn't do anything with us. So I was hanging out with the boys all the time. Well, the one night we were on the deck and we started to play Truth or Dare. And one of them asked, would you sleep with us? And I said, yeah. So at around 3 a.m., I snuck into the room and things started to get real nasty. There are kids on this app, so just use your imagination. And things started to get really loud and we woke their parents up, like for part two. Part two. So we thought that we woke their parents up and we heard someone walking up the stairs. So I ran into the bathroom, hid, and they asked if everything was okay. And I was just like, oh, I'm not feeling good. I think I caught whatever my best friend has. So they went back downstairs and we thought they went back to sleep. They were never asleep. So we decided to go onto the deck and finish the nastiness that we were doing. And I was like, oh, okay, we don't have to be that quiet now. Because their bedroom was in the front of the house and the porch was on the back of the house. And we were on the second floor, and below that there was another porch with a fire pit and everything. And I could see below us. Well, out of the corner of my eye, I thought I saw somebody walk into the house. But stupid me, I just ignored it. Not even a minute later, I hear the sliding door open, and I hear, and we all turn around and everybody's standing there. So they sent me home and told my parents. But I didn't get grounded because low-key my mom knew I was a hoe. Crazy story time about how my sister and I found out that we were hooking up with the same guy. So I was a freshman, my sister was a sophomore, and there was this really cute guy in her grade that I liked. But I could never find a way to talk to him because we weren't in the same grade and had none of the same classes. And my sister and I were not close at all. We didn't tell each other shit, we didn't really talk to each other or anything. So by that being said, we never told each other about the boys that we liked. We just didn't have that bond. Well, track season came around. So they called all the people down who wanted to do track, and I saw him walk past my classroom window, so I decided to go too. So I signed up for track, and him and I started to talk a little bit. We exchanged numbers, and he was popular, I wasn't, so he didn't want to be seen with me. So after attendance, we would go to this graveyard right by the track and hook up. Well, the next day we had a meet at our school. So him and I went to the graveyard, hooked up, and that's when it started getting crazy, for part two. Part two. So on our way back from doing our thing, we had saw a group of kids that were behind this bush and they were chiefing. And we didn't think that they saw us because we were like, oh, they're just smoking, whatever. So I go back to the meet, everything is good until the end of the meet. One of my best friends sends me this picture that I guess somebody posted on their story. And it was a picture of me and the kid hooking up. And next thing I know, my sister is blowing up my phone. And like I said, my sister and I didn't have a good bond, so I didn't give a shit what she had to say because I didn't know. So then I got home. And as soon as I walked into my room, my sister was literally waiting there for me. And she's like, what the fuck is wrong with you? Him and I are in a relationship. And I'm like, bitch, what the fuck? And she was like, well, it's on the down low, but we're in a relationship. What the fuck is wrong with you? You're a whore. So then she decides to drive both of us over to his house. So we all decided to just stay away from each other. But then they got back together. So I just figured that wasn't fair and I'm still hooking up with him while they're together. Crazy story time about how I found my aunt and my boyfriend hooking up at a family function. So every year my mom and stepdad would have a Christmas party and everyone from both sides of the family would come. And I also invited my boyfriend. And at this time, my boyfriend and I were both juniors in high school. So everybody came to the party and everything was going good. Well, an hour into the party, all the adults were super drunk. So before we all opened gifts, I decided to help my mom clean up dinner. So while I'm washing the dishes, I look over and my aunt and boyfriend are talking a lot. And she started to get really touchy with him, but I didn't think anything of it because she was super drunk. So after I'm done cleaning up, we all start opening gifts. And my boyfriend goes up to my room to go get his phone off the charger. And after he went upstairs, my aunt was like, oh, I need to go throw up. So about 10 minutes goes past and my boyfriend's still up in the room grabbing his phone, so I went to check on him. And I walk upstairs to see my aunt and my boyfriend laying on my bed making out. For part two. Part two to how I caught my aunt and my boyfriend hooking up at a family function. So like I said, they are laying on my bed making out. Doors wide open, they don't even bother to shut the door. And both of their shirts are off. And I think I should just put in here, my aunt is 28. She's on my stepdad's side. She's really young. So they look up and my aunt's just drunk as fuck looking at me. And she's like, do you want to join? Bitch, what the fuck? So I'm just shook. And I start screaming. Everybody rushes up the stairs and my mom pushes me out of the way and sees my boyfriend and my aunt laying on my bed with their shirts off. So my mom starts screaming at everybody. So my mom calls the cops, says that an adult is touching an underage boy.
and she calls his mom, tells her what happened. So my boyfriend and I broke up, so that spread around the whole school, and word got out that they actually started seeing each other.
Story time about how my boyfriend cheated on me with a 17-year-old girl. So when summer started, I started working at this new job. And I had a really good connection with one of my coworkers. And he was 28 years old. So we started talking. But I would get mad at him a lot because he would ignore my messages asking to hang out. And on top of that, every time that we got done with work, we would all go sit and eat, and he would sit next to this one girl. And by the way, she was 17. And I could see them flirting all the time. Well, finally, once summer ended, she moved away. And then I felt like I had a real chance to start dating him. So we started hanging out a lot and hooking up a lot. After a few months, I started taking our relationship serious. Well, apparently not for him, because there was this girl on his phone that he had been texting a lot. So weirdly enough, after that, I get a DM from the girl that he would always flirt with at work. And she asked me if I was dating him. And I said, yeah, and then she goes, oh, well, he's been texting me a lot. So then I blocked her and went and hooked up with one of his friends that night, like for part 2. Part 2 about how my boyfriend was cheating on me with a 17-year-old girl. So like I said, I hooked up with his friend that night, but I didn't tell him for a couple months because he would always say that we weren't dating, even though we were basically in a relationship. So we were doing really good until around Christmas time. So after he gave me my gifts, which was socks and a candle, he left for Massachusetts. I don't know if I said that right. And a month before this, I had unblocked the girl that he was flirting with. So weirdly enough, after he left, she DM'd me, basically asking if I was still dating him again. And I was like, yeah, why? And she goes, well, I need to tell you something. He actually took my virginity, and he's been sending me a lot of gifts, like a record player and albums, and we've been talking on the phone every night. So when I confronted him about it, he said he felt bad for her because he took her virginity. So after that, I confessed to hooking up with his best friend and called him a child predator. Story time about my toxic ex-friend group. So my freshman year, I had moved to a new high school. So right away, I started being friends with this group of girls, and they were super nice. And I was also friends with this group of guys. Well, since I was friends with both groups, we all started hanging out all the time, but only whenever I was there. The boys just didn't want to hang out with the other girls. And after a few months, the girls started acting really strange. So anytime that I would hang out with the boys and not invite them, they would ignore me for a whole week. Meaning they wouldn't talk to me in school, they wouldn't answer my messages, or anything like that. Not a single one of them. And also, anytime that we hung out, they would be like, oh, invite the boys. And it was like they never wanted to hang out with me. So the one night, one of the boys was throwing a party, and I was going, and the girls asked if they could come, but they had drama with a lot of people, so the boys didn't want them coming, but I invited them anyways. Like for part 2. Part 2 to the toxic ex-friend group story time. So, I invited them to the party, they showed up, and they were being really rude and standoffish the whole entire night. And these girls literally hated it whenever I would hang out with the boys or talk to the boys. Come to find out that every single one of the girls had a crush on every single one of the guys that were in my friend group. Also, I'm a very friendly person and will talk to anybody, and they got pissed off whenever I was talking to anybody who wasn't them. So a little bit into the party, I start getting a lot of dirty looks from a lot of different girls that I've never even talked to. And this girl walks up to me and she's like, why have you been Snapchatting my boyfriend? And I'm like, girl, what are you talking about? She goes, a few of your friends told me that you like my boyfriend and that you've been Snapchatting him and trying to get with him. So then she calls the girls over from my friend group and goes, didn't she tell me this? And they're like, yeah, she tries to get with everybody's boyfriend. So after that, I got kicked out of both friend groups because they spread a bunch of lies and rumors about me. Story time about me being the toxic best friend. So my best friend was dating this guy for about a year and a half. And for the past 6 or 7 months, she would say that she wasn't happy, she didn't like how she was being treated, but she couldn't leave him. Well, at this time, they lived together, and that night, we were supposed to decorate her apartment for her birthday party. So since she was at work, she just told me to go over her house and start decorating until she got home. Well, who happened to be there but her shitty-ass boyfriend? And him and I didn't really get along. Well, him and I were setting up, and he was being super nice. Like, overly nice. Which really weirded me out. Well, later on after the party, my best friend was hammered, so we both put her to bed and started cleaning up. And we were both drunk and started flirting with each other. And then one thing led to another. And I did it with my best friend's boyfriend in her house. So for the next 3 months, we have this secret relationship, like for part 2. Part 2 to me being the toxic best friend. So like I said, him and I had this secret relationship for 3 months straight. And I would always just go over to my best friend's house while she was working and see him then. Well, the one day she came home early from work, and she walked in on her boyfriend and I in her bed. So after that, she finally got the courage to leave her boyfriend, and now she's happily married. So I kind of saw it as I pushed her to do something that she knew she would never do. And after having my number blocked for like 3 years, she texts me and she says, "I wanted to thank you for what you did. You showed me that I could leave my boyfriend and that you were actually just a terrible friend. But now I'm happy for her. She's living the best life that she can live, and I'm still with her ex-boyfriend." Story time about how my boyfriend and I got robbed for over $3,000. And I know someone's about to be like, $3,000 isn't even a lot of money. We were both teenagers and both saved up a year's worth of paychecks for this, so it was a lot of money to us. So my boyfriend and I were looking for a car that we could use for about a year or so, and we found this one guy on Facebook. And the car looked too good for the price that he was selling it at, but I got in contact, asked him if he would meet me somewhere, and then he started being super sketchy. He was like, "Well, I still have to do some work on it, so can you guys come to my house?" So we drove an hour away to his place, and we pull up to this apartment, and we drive around a few times, and the car is nowhere to be seen. So he meets us outside, we go in his house, super nice, offered us drinks and everything, and then he goes, "Okay, can I have the money now?" And we're like, "Well, we want to see the car." And he goes, "You guys can see the car after you give me the money, I just don't want to get robbed." So we give him the money, and he goes to the back to count it, like for part 2. Part 2 on my boyfriend and I getting robbed. So like I said, we gave him the money and he said he had to go to the back to count it. So I look over at my boyfriend and he's shaking his head because we already knew what was going on at this point. And as soon as I hear footsteps, I turn my head and this guy is standing there with a gun pointed in between my boyfriend and I's heads and a baseball bat in the other hand. And then he goes, "Okay, you guys can get the fuck out of my house now." Before we leave his house, my boyfriend's like, "Bro, can I at least get the money back?" And of course the guy says no. So then I called the cops, and my boyfriend didn't want me to call the cops because he was like, "I want to handle it my own way." But I didn't care. That was money that we worked hard for. So I got on the phone with the police. We went down to the police station. We made our statements and everything like that. And then we go back like I think a week later, and they show us a picture and they're like, "Oh, is this him?" Well, apparently this guy had a lot of gun charges and everything like that. So he went to jail and had to do community service like for part 3. Story time about how I hooked up with a guy in my science teacher's closet. So my whole grade went on this field trip, and everybody was dressing super nice, wearing a dress. And I wore a dress that day, even though I was more of a leggings and t-shirt kind of gal. And I wore spandex under because I hated not being able to move around. Well, after our field trip, everybody's jumping around on the bus, you know, I don't care what I'm doing because I have shorts on under my dress. And after school that day, I get a text from one of the popular boys. And he goes, "I'm really physically attracted to you." And I was like, "Oh, same, like, period." And he was like, "Want to hook up tomorrow?" And I was like, "During school?" He goes, "Yeah, I have a place where we can hook up." And I wasn't really experienced with boys. So I was like, fuck it, if I'm going to experiment, it's going to be with you. Because he was really hot. So the next day I meet him during lunch, and he takes me to this one spot, but we couldn't hook up there because it wasn't blocked off like it usually is. So we go to my science teacher's room, and right after we hook up, our science teacher walks in. Story time about how my boyfriend was cheating on me for 3 months straight at his new job. So a little background information. At this point in our relationship, I did not have much trust for him because of his cheating in the past. Well, when he got this new job, I decided that I was going to start trusting him. I don't know why, stupidest thing I've ever done. So a month goes past, he's been working at this place for a while, and he comes home one night with a girl's phone number in his pocket. And I'm like, "Whose phone number is this?" He's like, "Oh, one of the girls that I work with wants me to talk about her problems with her." So I threw the number away, and I started to get really paranoid. But every time that I would get paranoid, he would be like, "Babe, I'm not doing anything, you know, like, I really love you, I'm trying to change." And he said that literally every night. And his brother worked with him. Well, the one day he really pissed his brother off, so his brother was like, "I'm telling her everything that you've been doing." So he calls me and says he's been fucking 2 other girls at work. Like for part 2. Part 2 about my cheating boyfriend. So after I got off the phone, he's trying to convince me that it's not true, saying that the only reason why his brother would say that is because he was mad at him, which I kind of believe because his brother did lie 24/7, or try to play jokes on everybody. So I ended up believing my boyfriend, and to put the icing on top of the cake, I believed him even more because his brother texted me saying that it wasn't true. So a few months go by and he quits that job, and at this time him and I were really on and off because I didn't like the way that I was being treated. While being broken up for a few days, I got the app Tinder.
And I guess the day after I got my Tinder, his friend showed him the app and he got it too. And the first person that he saw whenever he logged onto the app was me. So he texted me saying, "You're a whore and I'm so happy I cheated on you with that girl." And that really broke my heart, because every night he would come home telling me he loved me after he did whatever with those girls. And anytime I got paranoid about him cheating, he would comfort me. Story time about how I was the side chick. So it was my freshman year and I had just moved to a new school. And I lived next to this senior boy. You know, the one that thinks you're good enough to do stuff with, but not good enough to date? Yeah, that one. Well, we both were on the same bus and I thought he was really cute, so I asked him for his Snapchat. And I got it. So we started talking a lot, and we would always talk about me sneaking over his house because my parents were super strict. So homecoming night, I saw him grinding with this girl, but I didn't exactly think anything of it because literally everybody was just being passed around. Well, I went home after, and at like 2 a.m, I got a text from him saying to come over. So I went over there, we did the dirty, and then I started to go over there almost every other night. At 2 a.m. And there was this one girl that I got really close with. And I told her all about the situation, but I didn't tell her till like 3 months after it was happening because he told me not to tell anybody, of course. And she goes, "You know he has a girlfriend, right?" So I felt really bad and confronted him, like for part 2. Part 2 of me being the side chick. So that night he had asked me to come over again. And I went over there, but it's not what you think it was for. I got over there and I was like, "When were you gonna tell me you had a girlfriend?" Literally, this comment made me want to throw up. He goes, "What do you mean? I thought you knew." So I was like, "No, I actually didn't." And he goes, "So does that mean you don't want to come over anymore?" He goes, "I really liked you, and I was gonna break up with my girlfriend for you." Which I know this is so bad, but that made me happy because I had the biggest crush on him. But then I just left. And the girl that he was dating was a senior. And I asked my friend for her Snapchat so I could Snapchat her. So I did, and I told her everything that was going on. And somehow it got flipped around on me. Her saying that I was obsessed with her boyfriend. And then she got the nudes that I sent her boyfriend and sent them around the whole school. My new school. Moral of the story, if he says he's single, make sure he's actually single. Toxic ex-boyfriend story time. So I was a junior in high school, and I had just gotten out of a 4-year relationship with this one guy. Well, I started to see him date around, so I thought I should do the same. I started dating this new guy who was known as the biggest player. Since I just got out of a long-term relationship, we decided to take things slow. We both went to different schools, so we both had separate proms. And of course, we both asked each other. So his prom came around first, so we got a shore house with his friends. And before we left, he bought me 2 dozen roses. This man has never bought me anything. And my mom was like, that's strange. I know exactly what he's trying to do with you. I now see that may have been a warning. But did I listen? No. After prom, we went to the shore house and he tried to make it happen. I said no. The next morning, we both left. It was a Saturday because I had dance and he had baseball practice. He went back to the shore house that night and I didn't hear from him all weekend, like for part 2. Part 2 because y'all are impatient and gotta go to sleep. So I didn't hear from him all weekend, but I left my blanket there and I texted him so he wouldn't forget it. And he was like, "Okay, yeah, I'll drop it off and we can hang out because I haven't seen you." And then he says that he apparently spilt beer all over it, so he had to wash it. And everything was good until my prom. So we went and he was acting extremely weird and super distant. So that's when I kind of knew that something was up. I didn't have a shore house for my prom, but he was like best friends with all the senior girls who went to my school. So of course they invited him and we went. And then I saw all over social media that there were pictures of him with his ex holding hands and hanging all over each other at the beach. So I had work that night and I just so happened to work with his best friend. And I told him about how he was being super distant and how I saw all those pictures all over social media. And he was like, "Yeah, we never spilt beer on your blanket that night." He was actually with his ex and they did it on the blanket. Moral of the story, don't date the guy who's named a player because it's probably for a reason.
Am I wrong for getting mad that I wasn't invited to my ex-wife's wedding? My ex-wife and I were together for 7 years and we have 2 daughters together, ages 5 and 3. Shortly after the birth of our 3-year-old, we broke up in a kind of civil matter. A few months after our breakup, she met her current fiancé and they started dating. Once our divorce was finalized, a year after, they got engaged. Overall, due to the fact that I'm the father of 2 children that I have with her, and I've been in her family for 7 years, I have a pretty great relationship with her family and I still get invited to family gatherings. I can tell my ex is not too happy about it, but she sucks it up for the sake of the kids and her family. They've been planning their wedding for some time now and they just gave out invitations. I wasn't included. Our daughters were, but I wasn't. I contacted her family, mainly her sisters and her mom, and I expressed how upset I am that I'm excluded from the wedding, and I'm even more upset that they didn't do something about it. They said that it's not up to them and it's the couple's decision and they wish they had me there, but they don't want to piss off my ex-wife by going against her wishes. Later, my ex called me and scolded me for calling her family to complain and asked me why I feel entitled to an invite to her wedding. I told her that I still feel like part of the family, and it's weird that I'm invited to all these family gatherings but excluded from this one, and I think we can be civil and supportive towards each other. I also feel like it will be a good thing for our kids to see us being so supportive, and me being in the wedding sends a good message. We are still co-parenting after all, and we have a decent kind of relationship despite our breakup, and I don't see a reason to be excluded since I'm still a big part of her life and we share 2 kids. She said I'm very entitled for this and that it's ridiculous how I got mad that I, as an ex, was not invited to the wedding and that she doesn't owe me that. So, am I the asshole? Why would you want to go to your ex's wedding, you weirdo? What? Co-parenting or not, that's no. Ew. No. Am I wrong for calling my brother's girlfriend disgusting and refusing to meet her? I, 27 female, recently had a very unpleasant encounter with my brother's 32 male new girlfriend, 21 female, that has culminated in the family getting dragged into it. We'll call her Anne. He's been with Anne for about 5 months, but I've never met her for various reasons from both of our ends. He said he wanted to get to know her properly before introducing her to us all. And I made a crack along the lines of, yeah, well, 12-year-olds are known to be unpredictable, which made him sulk for a while too. I probably shouldn't have said that, but the age gap is weird to me. I met up with him a few weeks ago for coffee. The topic of Anne came up briefly, but he just said that they are still together and he liked her, so I was coming around to the idea that I maybe should stop being a judgmental asshole and just meet her. After, I went back to my car, grabbed my plastic bags, and went shopping in town. After about an hour, I came back to my car and it was messed up. It had been scratched, a drink thrown over it, but the worst thing was that someone had smeared blood on my driver door and literally shoved a used feminine hygiene product in the door handle. I had to go back to the store and buy rubber gloves and bleach just to get back into my car. I get home and I get a text from my brother. He said Anne had confronted him when he got home over his cheating and she thought I was the other woman and had vandalized my car. He said she was really upset and wanted to apologize to me in person and give me flowers. I said that even if I had been some other woman, that what she did was disgusting and she was nuts. I never wanted to meet her and I expected payment for cleaning and damages. For the last 2 weeks, it's been this revolting door of my family calling me and telling me to let her apologize. Me letting them know exactly what she did and them mostly agreeing with me in the end. Then I get messages from my brother telling me to stop telling people what happened because it was embarrassing Anne. I had some aunts who are mad at me for even telling them. Make it make sense. And her family are of course livid with me, not to mention my brother. It's just so much noise in my head that I'm starting to think I should just drop it because I have repaired the damage and had it cleaned. I've sent my brother the bill but not had anything from him yet because he says I've done emotional damage to Anne. Bro, honest to God, I swear, I would have called the cops. I'm petty like that. I would have pressed charges and be like, yo, this person vandalized my car. And you have proof, like the text message proof that or the call that she vandalized your car. You're too nice. I don't care if my brother or not. I would be like, this bitch is crazy. I think it was emotionally damaging to have to see what she did to my car. But in the off chance that I've gone mad and I am overreacting, please tell me. So am I the asshole for calling my brother's girlfriend disgusting and never wanting to meet her because of what she did to my car? Am I wrong for returning the shoes I got for my husband after he accused me of stealing from him? My 29, husband 36, is the breadwinner of the family. I stay home with the kids who are preschool age. He pays for the mortgage, bills, household needs, food, kids' needs, etc. He has set a monthly budget for each category and handles getting everything done. Recently, he has become overwhelmed and told me to handle grocery shopping, but before he let me, he asked me to write a list of all the stuff we need so he could calculate the total and also so he'd have an idea of how much I'll be spending when I take his credit card. I didn't have an issue with that because this way we'd watch our spending habits. However, he said I'm never allowed to get something that isn't on the list unless I'm paying for it some other way. Huh? On Friday, I was doing some grocery shopping as usual and saw that the store had some nice shoes on sale. The price was insanely low for this brand, and so I decided to grab a pair for my husband, thinking he'd be happy with them since he needed new sneakers anyway. I bought them, and when I showed them to him, he flipped out on me saying I made a huge mistake by buying something that wasn't on the list. I agreed with him, but I thought that since the shoes were for him, then it'd be different. He said I screwed up and shouldn't have bought those sneakers without telling him. To my defense, I said the price was so low, and it's not like I spent $100 on shoes. And also, I saw this as a great deal and wanted him to have those nice sneakers. He plainly said that what I did is considered stealing since he never consented to have those sneakers purchased and said that I'm being irresponsible with money. That is why I no longer have an income and my spending habits need a grip. We argued about it for hours and he avoided speaking to me for the rest of the day. The next day, I went and returned the sneakers and took the money back. He got home in the evening and lost it when he found out. He said he couldn't believe how petty and childish I was to actually do this. I explained that I was just correcting my mistake. He tried to contact the store and was told the sneakers were already sold. He got even angrier with me, but I told him that he accused me of stealing from him when I was just trying to do a nice gesture. He yelled that I had a lot of nerve calling what I did a nice gesture while using his money to do it. I told him he had no right to yell at me after I corrected my mistake and gave back the money he accused me of stealing. He threw a fit, then went out to his friends and came home late at night still not talking to me. So am I wrong here?
2 years ago, I, 27, got married in a courtroom just to get the immigration paperwork started for my abroad now husband, 29. He always promised to provide me with a real ceremony eventually. The ceremony I wanted was picked out and cost about $7,000 in a South American resort, includes ceremony, reception, and week-long honeymoon. I loved the idea since it was a country both our families could easily fly to. We could have had it in my country, USA, but not his, since members of my family legally aren't allowed to enter his family's country due to felonies. To be fair to his family, I suggested that we all travel instead of just his family traveling. These last 2 years, I've been planning and saving for our marriage. I have $6,000 set aside exclusively for it. Meanwhile, I've also spent thousands on his immigration fees to make it eventually legal for him to live and work here. He stayed in his own country in the meantime these last 2 years. Our immigration case is almost at the final part. All that's left is paying 2 last fees to the NVC from a USA bank account. Since I'm the only one with a USA bank account, it's up to me. I joked and said, alright, I'm about to spend this last 500-ish bucks, but I'm still waiting for that ceremony date. To which he replied, why bother since we're already married? He further explained he liked my self-made website and invitations I had ready to go for the wedding, and that he was proud of me for holding on to an idea for 2 years. But that it's a waste of money in his eyes. But he wouldn't be opposed to it if I just paid for it myself. Me and the wedding planner at the resort were completely blindsided since this came out of nowhere. He seemed happy with it, and I assumed that he would contribute to the price up until that point. I didn't put my bank details in, so the immigration case completely halted. He says I'm ruining his future, but why should I hold up my end when he didn't hold up his? His family and him both really think that I'm being an a-hole. Am I the asshole for canceling my husband's immigration case right at the end? I work as a security guard, and me and my team have traditionally worn a typical police-style uniform when on duty. We recently had a new site manager who wanted to change our image and impose one of those concierge-style uniforms with a blazer and tie, despite all of us objecting as it was uncomfortable, impractical, and we all hate the way it looks. The manager told us the uniform change was coming whether we liked it or not, because one thing he cares about more than anything is presenting the right image. So after we began wearing the new uniform, my team, at my instruction, began to deliberately make ourselves look as gross and slovenly as possible. For example, we would spill food and drink on our uniforms on purpose and not wash them or iron them prior to starting a shift. One guy made a point of wearing his uniform when he went to the gym and worked out before coming on duty, so the uniform was crumbled, drenched in sweat, and reeking. We would drag our blazers through the dirt and mud and wear shirts half untucked. When I needed to sneeze, I would openly and in front of clients sneeze into the tie that I was wearing and loudly blow my nose into it like it was a handkerchief. Also, at the end of every shift when writing our reports, each of us would always litter the report with mentions of how bad the uniform was and how it made the job more difficult. Complaints about our appearances skyrocketed, and the manager held an emergency meeting where he screamed at us and called us selfish a-holes. But we refused to be cooperative, so he was eventually let go because he couldn't manage us effectively. Before he left, he told me that I was the biggest piece of crap he ever met for being the ringleader of this whole thing. I don't think I am, but the fact that he was fired and has a family is the thing that makes me consider that maybe I am. Am I the asshole for leading a mutiny against the new uniform policy and getting a guy fired?
Am I wrong for ruining my work colleague's wedding and getting them arrested? The title sounds bad, but hear me out. I, 38 female, had 2 work colleagues, Mary and Adam, both in their late 20s, early 30s. Mary started in the company first, and then she got Adam to join. They worked in different departments, and Mary was in mine. Later, Mary left the company to pursue another career. When they started at the company, they were already married for a few years. Now, Mary is the kindest and loveliest person I've ever met. She was always polite, helpful, and would cheer anyone up. So it came to a shock when we found out that she is divorcing Adam because he has cheated on her. I had called to express how sorry I am that this has happened to her, and we've been talking daily ever since. I was impressed how well Mary holds herself in such a situation. She wouldn't badmouth Adam, and the only thing she mentioned was how her wedding dress and a few family heirlooms went missing when she was moving her stuff from their apartment. She thought they might be misplaced in a different box and will turn up eventually. A few years passed. I now work in the same department as Adam. He is a good work colleague but can be dismissive and ignorant sometimes. Adam invited me to his wedding with the lady, Chelsea, he cheated on Mary with. As the entire department was invited, I said yes, making sure Mary was okay with this. I've also told her where the wedding will be because it's not too far from where she lives and we can go grab some drinks after if she wanted to. On the day of Adam's wedding, I had noticed that Chelsea was wearing a similar dress that Mary had worn in the photos of her and Adam's wedding years ago. So without thinking, I had snapped a picture and I sent it to Mary with the caption saying, "Doesn't this dress look familiar?" Mary saw the message but didn't respond, and about an hour later the police showed up at the venue. I need to add that the police in our country is ruthless and any theft is considered a criminal matter for the police to deal with. Police had asked Chelsea to take the dress and all the jewelry off. Chelsea refused and started arguing with them, and then Adam joined in. Everyone at the wedding had to leave. I had tried to call Mary, but she wouldn't pick up the phone. As we found out later, Chelsea was wearing Mary's wedding dress and her heirlooms. Mary spotted them on her in the picture I sent her and called the police. Apparently, she had previously asked Adam if he had them, and he declined, saying he never saw them. So, after she saw the picture, she knew he was lying and stole them. Chelsea had to leave the wedding dress and jewelry at the police station and go home wearing her underwear and Adam's jacket after they were bailed out. Yesterday, Adam returned to the office and went completely mental at me, blaming me for sending a picture to Mary and ruining his wedding. He would also call me an asshole for what I did.
Am I the asshole for locking the door to prevent my husband from getting involved in my job interview? I, female 33, am unemployed, but God knows I've been looking for a job for well over 5 months. I started looking as soon as I recovered from my knee surgery. My husband has a high-paying job, and first he suggested I leave my career as a sales representative behind. Not up to his wealthy family standards, and they mocked me for it a lot. He wanted me to stay home, but I refused because I love my job and want to grow in it. He suggested he find me a better job since he has connections, but that's not in my field. I've had several job interviews and my husband ruined all of them for me, and here's how. Am I the asshole for locking the door to prevent my husband from getting involved in my job interview? He'd walk into the room whenever I was having a potential job interview and introduce himself and take over the conversation. He'd tell the interviewer about how good I am, but slip in some bad stuff that eventually cost me the job. His argument was that he's just making recommendations since he has connections and influence. I told him stop, and he said he was trying to guide me. Anyway, I got a job interview and I decided to lock the door. Of course, my husband asked me to let him in, and I put my headphones on and used noise canceling. After the interview, he went off and called me disrespectful and awful.